We Get Outdoors Nation, when I started kayaking when I was a boy, there was this guy who appeared in magazines and was doing freestyle stuff. And I'm like, I want to learn to do that shit. And and then I saw in my schedule that I'm interviewing this guy called Dan. And then I saw his surname. And then I realized that he was the guy who I wanted to copy it and do that shit. And he's now moved on. He's kayaked, he's SUP'd. And Dan, welcome to the We Get Outdoors podcast.
Hey, Rob, thanks a lot. Really excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all the way across the world.
That's it, like 10 hours time difference, and courtesy of the World Wide Web, here we are in the same place at the same time.
It's amazing, you know, and when we started boating, what we're doing now was not a possibility. And, you know, it's every day I kind of remind myself what it was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when we were paddling, no internet, no social media, no digital cameras. There's a lot of parallels, but so much has changed, and it's so much easier now to communicate and get your ideas across. And I just feel really fortunate to be here and to experience my life during the time period that I've been alive, because there's so much has changed with technology and culture and the outdoors and the way I experience them and my lifestyle, that I feel like I've really lived the golden era of a life that is really special. And I've gotten to see a lot of things change drastically. Not to say that if I was born in the 20s and lived till the 2000s, it would be any different. But I just feel with the internet and social media and digital imagery and all that stuff is really, it really plays a part, ironically, in the outdoor lifestyle.
It
and
does.
In the sports I've done and trying to be professional and make what I love into a passion. Those are some critical elements that have changed so much.
Do you remember those first videos that you were in? And I say videos, I don't know what you want to call them. Do you remember the mission that it involved, just to document and like actually shoot them, and the size and weight of the cameras? And now we've got stuff that can fit in the palm of your hand and do a better job.
Yeah, it's amazing. I call that the analog Dan days. You know, that was back when everything was analog. You know, we were shooting, all the video we were shooting was on 16 millimeter film, and you only got, 3 minutes max, or maybe a minute and a half if you're shooting slow motion. And we did one film in particular called Paddle Quest, and we shot the whole thing in film. So it was all on 16 millimeter or high 8 film, and we went all around the world. And we're running 60-foot waterfalls with a 20 pounds of camera gear in between your legs, and trying to swap film and be in the dark. And oh yeah, it's amazing what you can just do with a cell phone now. So I really look back at those days of the analog days and really relish those days. And those are some special moments that I probably took it for granted a little bit when it was happening, but now I look back and appreciate it that much more.
So we'll get into how you ended up where you are eventually, but it would be fair to say in the midnight or in the 90s and early 2000s, you were at the absolute cutting edge of, in particularly from my perspective, whitewater kayaking, in terms of documenting, not only pushing the paddling, but documenting the experience for others to share. I could even go as far as saying maybe even shaping where paddlers are today and how they've actually taken what you did and evolved it into social media.
Yeah, I mean, maybe back then there was no social media. There was no, to be a professional whitewater kayaker meant that you had basically two opportunities. You can compete and do well and win at races and competitions, or you can be in the videos, and the pictures and the magazines. And so those are the two options. And I decided I'm going to try to capitalize on both. And I was also running a snowboard shop in Montana called Board of Missoula, which was started 31 years ago by my partner and I back in 1988. And, we were watching videos of Craig Kelly all day. We were watching snowboard videos all day. And, I was looking at the videos and I was looking at people like Craig Kelly and saying, wow, this guy's really, made his passion into a career. How has he done that? Like, what are the main factors? Sure, he's won like probably every huge competition, but people remember Craig Kelly and those type of iconic athletes as much by their competition results, but also by the imagery and the song and the video that you watched 100 times until the VHS tape wore out and broke in half. And those were the memories that I remember that brought me the most joy. And then that really sparked my desire to start really filming my kayak exploits and making something more than just kayak porn, like something with a story, something that talked more about the cultures we were going to, cool transitions, great music, and something that was not just rock and roll, high energy paddling, but it was a storyline. There was something to it, like a movie, and that's when I started talking to some of the guys I was shooting some snowboard videos with at the time. Said, hey, I really want to put the same amount of effort and quality into a world-class kayaking movie. There has very few out back then that really captured what I felt like was the lifestyle that embodied the whole spirit of how I wanted to live.
Because it's far more than just jumping on a board or jumping in a boat and hucking down a river. There's all of the culture around the river and the getting to and from. And I remember I went to the White Nile the first time in 1999, I think it was. Okay. And I went on my own. And if I'm to be honest, the white water was big, intimidating, and relatively scary. But nowhere near as scary as the hippos, the crocodiles, the culture, the journey to and from there, the civil war that was going on in Uganda at that point in time.
Yeah.
And it would almost be a waste just to document the river itself, because there's so much more to it than that.
Absolutely. The backstory and the behind the scenes look at these adventures is really 90% of the story. The beautiful lit shot with the, golden hour and the class 5 huge whitewater and somebody paddling through it and making it look beautifully effortless is just, that's just the kind of the cream on the top, it's not the whole enchilada. So, I agree with you 100%. And, I have a lot of respect for what people are doing now. I know there's a lot of great videographers out there. And I always say, hey, to be a professional athlete these days, you pretty much need to be a producer, a social media professional. You really need to have a lot more skills and tools in your tool bag than just your trade, than just what you do in a kayak or on a mountain bike or on a snowboard or whatever. It's almost harder these days than it was back then. We could kind of hone in on just a few mediums. So we're in a lot of choices. And it wasn't just nonstop either, like social media can be. So, getting some photos this year that would hopefully go in the magazines next year or 6 months from now, hey, that was a good investment of your time. Investing in plans to do a trip all around Chile or something like that, 3 or 4 months from now, shooting all the video in 16, then sending it off to get processed, then sending it off to get transferred, then finally getting in a studio with, $100,000 Avid or something and a decent editor who actually knew how to run the machine well. That was quite a process. And now you can do all that on your phone and while you're sitting in the car waiting for the shuttle to get run. So it's pretty amazing how far it's come, but I have a lot of respect for the people who are trying to make it work right now. And I'd say I got pretty lucky too in the time period, particularly in snowboarding and kayaking, when I decided to kind of turn my passion into more than that. I was kind of on the early part of that, early stages of that. So it was probably a little bit easier for me than it might have been for some of the people that came on a little bit later, where there wasn't maybe as much support or resources and what have you to make that kind of a lifestyle happen. So I feel really fortunate. So I owe it a lot to a lot of my peers and mentors and sponsors and people who invested in me to be able to do all that stuff.
Thinking of people who invested you, we were talking before we hit record that both of us had unique influences in our childhood that permitted us to not go to school, go to university, get a 9-to-5 job with a white collar shirt and lock yourself in a cubicle for 40 years. What was it about your childhood that kind of permitted you to go and say, screw it, I'm going to be a professional snowboarder and kayaker and see what happens?
I think it probably all started when I was pretty young, and my parents were like, yeah, if it's not nighttime, you're not inside. Like, if it's daylight hours, you're outside. I don't care what you do. Go play in the sandbox, go ride your bike, go find a friend. Just don't get run over by a car. Walk up the street 5 blocks and buy some gum for 10 cents. I don't care. Just get out of our hair and get out of the house, because the only thing in the house is indoor stuff, and you can do indoor stuff when it's dark outside. So get outside, and that was it. That was the end of the story. And if I was hanging out inside during the day, they were like, what the hell are you doing inside? Why aren't you outside? It's nice outside. You have toys, you have bikes, go outside and play. So I think that started very early. And then, my father took a big interest into whitewater canoeing when I was about 7 or 8 years old. So he plunked me in the front of the canoe. And the first thing we did, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. Yep. So the first thing we did was drive down to southern Utah and get on the Green River. And this wasn't just a day run. There are really no good whitewater kayak day runs if you live in Salt Lake City. So this involved, doing 80 or 100 and I can't remember, maybe 150 miles of river. So this was a mission. And my dad was like, yeah, we're camping, we're going to be camping out. We're leaving. It's going to be a road trip / canoe trip / camping adventure. And I was just like, okay, Dad, I just have one question. He's like, the answer is yes. And I was like, how'd you know what my question was going to be? He's like, because I know you're going to ask me if you can bring your skateboard. So I actually brought my skateboard, and we would be down in southern Utah. There'd be no sidewalks. I'd be practicing my ollie on a rock or in the sand or something, and asking him if I could bring the skateboard and the canoe trip. And he's like, yeah, no, there will be no pavement on the canoe trip. So it really started with me being in the front of the canoe and learning all the strokes and how to paddle off the get-go in whitewater. I never really learned how to paddle a canoe in a lake or anything. He just threw me in the front of the Old Town Pathfinder, and I was either paddling, drawing, bracing, bailing, or crying. It was one of those. So there were a lot of terrified moments, but I learned to get through it, and we had a lot of great friends to camp with, and it was mostly my dad's friends. They were kicking back by the fire, drinking gin and tonics, and I was setting up the tent and fighting back the urge to dig a big hole under it and watch my dad crawl into the tent and collapse into a big pile. Because I thought it was torture at first, but no, it ended up being really fun. And I kind of fell in love with camping, being outside, sleeping, in the back of the truck or in the tent and packing everything up in dry bags and throwing it in the canoe and actually traveling this enormous distance from point A to point B. I thought was just incredible. And it was fun. It was exhilarating, to be going that fast down Whitewater, which was all moving at the same time. So I skied a lot, but I really got into that 3D kind of feeling where you're on a piece of water that's also moving and you're moving on top of that as well. And I just thought that was a really cool kind of feeling and a really neat medium that you don't really get anywhere else, or I had never experienced that.
Yeah, I remember when I started paddling, before the days of dry suits for paddlers, and you're in like a what do you call it? A long john wetsuit, without the sleeves and something wool and something windproof. And I remember a journey back home for about 4 hours from where we paddled in Wales back to my family home. And I must have been ridiculously hypothermic. Like I shook for 4 hours straight. But it's funny that something makes us keep going back. And I can't work out what it is. Because for a lot of people, that degree of discomfort or pain or crying or whatever else would put them off and send them running away to the hills to never go again. And yet, I wonder, what was it for you, do you think, that made you keep coming back?
Well, I think a lot of it at first was I had no choice. I lived with my dad, and he was a single parent, and he was leaving for the weekend. He wasn't going to leave me there alone. He wanted to go on a canoe trip, so I'm going. Like I'm in the bow of the canoe, and hopefully I'm, doing what he says so that we don't crash. So it wasn't but a few more trips that we took, and I started watching the kayakers a little bit more closely and going, wow, well, that looks fun. I can be in my own kayak where I don't have to listen to my dad telling me how to paddle, when to paddle, where to paddle, and giving me the whole history lesson of every rock on the river on the way down. I was like, okay, that's for me. Dad, I want one of those, and I pointed at a kayak and it wasn't long until the very first production year of the Perception Dancer. I think I was probably 10 or 11. And he bought me one brand new, one of the first Perception Dancers that came into the shop. It was called Sid Sports back then in Salt Lake City, Utah. And he went and bought me a dancer. And that's what I started in. That was my very first kayak. I scratched off the CER on one side, so it said Dan. And on the other side, I turned the C into a G, so it said danger. So I was Danger Dan. And I couldn't reach the foot pedals or anything. And my hips were about like this, and the kayak was like this. And so learning how to roll was a bit wonky. I would just, I could kind of roll up, but the boat wouldn't do anything. And so I did a lot of pool sessions, but I never really learned how to roll too well. And my dad, I kept wanting to go kayaking. And so my dad would take me down Westwater and stuff like that. And I would swim everything. Like no big deal. Finally, my dad's friends were like, Alan, Dan has to learn how to roll because we are exhausted. We cannot rescue him anymore. So my dad put some time into outfitting my boat a little bit better. And I was able to learn how to roll. And then high school happened, and I kind of started doing the friend thing a little bit more and having a good time and, hanging out with my friends. So I wasn't paddling as much. But when I was a sophomore in high school, I had some pretty unsavory friends back then, and I was like, I don't think I want to do what they're doing this weekend. I think I'm going to get back in the kayak and go camping and check it out. And I had a friend named Justin Jimenez, who was also a snowboarder friend, that expressed some interest in learning how to kayak. And since I already knew how to roll, he had a family cabin up near the Alpine section of the Snake River near Jackson Hole, which is only maybe 4-hour drive from Salt Lake City. He said, well, let's go stay up at my family cabin, and then we'll go hit the Snake. And it turned into our weekend pilgrimage. Like, we were going every weekend, all spring. We would leave Friday right after school, and we would drive home Sunday exhausted from paddling all weekend. We did that. And we became lifelong friends, and Justin still paddles to this day. And that was really where I really got into it in high school again. So I started paddling every weekend, every chance I got, sophomore, junior, and senior year. You know, I was the long hair hippie playing on the hockey team. And, you know, my friends back then called me Granola Ice, because I was like the crunchy hippie that listened to, like, you know, Ice-T and NWA. And so they didn't know what to think of me, especially in Salt Lake City.
It's the Mormon capital or something, isn't it? Salt Lake City?
Yeah. So I went from Granola Ice, and then that turned into Ice G. That was like my nickname on the hockey team. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, high school was a lot of kayaking, a lot of snowboarding. I really was fortunate. My dad just totally supported me. Both my parents supported me and all my desires to just be outside having fun whenever I wasn't in school. So I had a pass at Snowbird. I had a season's pass at Alta for 12 plus years since I was a young kid. I had a locker up there with my snowboard in it. They didn't allow snowboarding at the ski areas back then. So I would spend the morning skiing a little bit, and I go grab my snowboard and hike for a couple hours across the street and some of the best backcountry in the world right there, and just snowboard down, leave my stuff in the locker up there. And 90 cents, I'd ride the bus back home, all the way home, walk about a mile home. And that was like, those were my winter days, you know, and we loved it. So,
I'd forgotten that snowboarding was banned in certain places. I remember when I learned to snowboard, I learned in Norway, and the Norwegian guy, Benny, who taught me, was like, he said, you do know a few years ago that this was against the law. And I'm like, what? And he's like, oh yes, the skiers didn't like us very much. This was you could get arrested for snowboarding on a ski slope. I'm like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Still like that at a few areas, a couple of them in Utah, actually. So, I was just fortunate. My dad was a big skier. And so, he made it a priority to invest in great gear for me. And, he worked really hard so that I could have, the latest and greatest gear as much as he could. Even if we had to buy it secondhand, we got the best gear we could afford. And he worked hard for that. So I really appreciate his efforts there, and had a lot of support from him to get up to the hill every day I could, and get out on the rivers as much as I could. And as soon as I got my driver's license, I think it was probably the day after I turned 16, I was boom. He got me a truck, and I was driving to the mountain, and I was driving to the river. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's super cool. Now, there's so many people who'll be listening to this who have one of those sports or their own outdoor sport as their passion. How did you transition from that passion into like profession sort of move? How did that work for you?
That's interesting. There's probably a lot of different avenues you could take. Back then I was just really I'm a competitive person. So I was looking for places to go share my passion. And for me, that was competitions. The competitions, I could I had a lot of fun competing because it forced me to improve my skills quicker than I could improve my skills by myself. It allowed me to meet other people that were as passionate about it as I was, because I was completely, obsessed. And then it really gave me things to strive for as well. And so I think that kind of started with the competition for me. And then at these competitions, you'd have all the booths, and people will have their booths with Dagger and Perception and Warner paddles or whatever. And I'd actually go up here and I'd start talking to the people who represented those brands. And I had the opportunity to actually, speak to those people in person, whether it was Rob Lesser, who was working for Perception back then. He was like a huge mentor of mine and someone I really looked up to. Someday I want to be like this guy. He sells kayaks during the week, and he helps design kayaks on the weekends at the competitions, and he's giving out stickers, and, he's nice to everybody, and he's helping everybody become a better paddler or have more fun or outfit their kayak. Back then we used to spend hours upon hours upon hours, like shaping our hip pads, just so, outfitting. We used to spend like 8 to 20 hours outfitting a kayak. Like I would glue little bits and chunks of foam, like 1 inch square, together one by one, hundreds and hundreds of them, just to get the outfitting just perfect so I could sit in my kayak for 8 hours a day, and be comfortable.
Did you ever have one of those small cheese graters, like a little almost Parmesan cheese grater that you take to the foam to like shave bits off?
Yeah.
Get it
Sureform tool,
smooth and rounded.
Yeah, I was using one yesterday. I still use it.
Good job. I've actually got one behind me in the office here, because I'm a big fan of solid foam outfitting in a boat, so I still do that.
Yeah, me too. I just, being able to get a kayak and go strap the pads in and just go straight to the river, nothing beats that. And I mean, kudos to companies like Jackson, who have I think revolutionized kayak outfitting, and some other companies. I mean, Piranha, everyone's really upped their game when it's come to take the kayak out of the bag and go to the river. You were not, when I started kayaking, that was not an option. You would take the kayak out of the bag, and then you really needed to invest some time, or you could even hire people to do the custom kayak outfitting back then for $50-$60, which is the same as paying someone $200 or $300 these days to actually outfit your kayak custom. They'd come to your house, you'd fit in there. It'd be like this 8-hour ordeal. So anyways, it was just turning the paddling or the snowboarding into my profession. It came to me in different ways. With the snowboarding, I went off to college in Missoula, Montana, and I got there and I needed a part for my winter stick snowboard, which broke on the first day I was at the local ski area up there called Snow Bowl, which was just amazing. But coming from Utah, I had high expectations. But it was like a little miniature snowbird. And I got down the mountain. I needed some parts for my bindings, and there just wasn't anywhere in town to buy them, and I was used to Salt Lake City. I could just roll up the street to Salty Peaks or Milo Sport, and they had just everything I needed. And I had no idea that every town didn't have a snowboard shop like that. So here I was in Missoula, Montana. I had to go to the Army Navy. They carried snowboards apparently. So I was in there, with the camo backpacks and the fatigues and everything else. And then there's a little snowboard section. And I was like, hey, I need some of these M6 screws or whatever to fix my snowboard bindings. They're like, huh? So I was at the hardware store, and the next day I was snowboarding. I rode up the chair with a guy named Zach. I was talking to him. I was majoring in recreation management. Got to talking to him. He was another college student, freshman. He was doing business. I said, well, I've been thinking for about the last 24 hours, this town needs a snowboard shop. like, it needs a snowboard shop. He was like, oh, that'd be a great idea. I was like, well, we should do it. We should do it. We should go into business together, you and me. I had known him for maybe 3 minutes at that point. And by the top of this chairlift, we had made a deal and we shook on it right there. We were going to start a snowboard shop. And 5 days later, I secured a loan from my grandparents and we bought 15 Kemper Rampage snowboards and started Borda Missoula in, must have been like January 1988. And we started Borda Missoula and it's still open to this day.
That's awesome. What a testimony.
Yeah. And it was an amazing, just by chance thing. So that segue was just kind of random chance. But my segue into paddling was a little bit more planned because I did spend most of my good powder days at the snowboard shop, hearing all the stories from my buddies who were out there shredding it all day while I was there in the shop, like sharpening edges, waxing boards, trying to sell a couple pairs of boots and not getting to powder day.
Yep.
And watching videos all day long. We just had like a skateboard section with a couch and a little lounge for people to come, and they would come after they'd been riding, drop their snowboards off, and they'd watch the videos. They'd be like, oh, the new video came out. We're going to head down to Borda Missoula and watch it, and they'd sit there for an hour and a half. They'd watch the whole thing. And
not spend $1.
Yeah, exactly. They'd buy a sticker, So, I was just watching what the stars were doing in the snowboard realm. And I said, if I really wanted to take this kayaking thing to the next level, I got to get out of retail because I'm not going to get there working in a shop all day. So I ended up selling my shop to my partner and leaving Borda Missoula. And then B, more importantly, was start working with some of the best photographers and filmers, cinematographers that I knew then, because I was doing a lot of snowboard video shoots and stuff like that. I was working with Nitro snowboards and Smith goggles, and we were doing some heli trips and this and that. And there was a company called Polar Bear Productions who was doing some snowboard videos that I was in. And he was the one who I started talking to about doing a kayak movie. Hey, Robbie, let's do a kayak movie, just like your snowboard movies, but actually even better. And let's make it happen. So that was in 1993, was the same year that I was going to try to qualify for the World Championship freestyle team, US freestyle team. And the trials are at Bob's Hole, which is only about an hour and a half from here on the Clackamas River.
Yep, I know it well.
Near Portland. And so I was training hard. I was, figuring some stuff out. I thought I was great. I had no idea because I was just judging myself against the few people I was paddling with in Montana and the Alberton Gorge or whatever. I could catch any wave backwards, forwards, do some kind of nice pirouettes. And every once in a while I could land one back in the hole and do another one and then another one and then another one. I was like, yeah. And I think this is what freestyle's all about, and I had been to Idaho a few times and watched like Rob Lesser and Doug Ammons and some other guys from Utah who were really good. Charlie Muncie was another young paddler back then. And I just decided that, freestyle kayaking was going to be my, what I wanted to do. And so I had also by chance met a guy named Lee Bonfiglio, who was from Oregon. And him and I decided to drive from the West Coast. I met him in Oregon as well. And we decided to drive. It was actually the year before the 93 team trials on the Ocoee, all the way out to Tennessee to check it out. And that was when I really got my first kind of taste of it, was the 92 Ocoee Whitewater Rodeo. And that was pretty neat. And so I had something to kind of gun for that whole year. And so my main objective was to make the US freestyle kayak team, which I did. I tied for third place with Chris Spelius in 1993, and incidentally ran into this crazy character that most people did not like, but him and I hit it off. Like we were always laughing. He was one of the best kayakers I had ever seen. He was a total punk rock, awesome guy, but he could be a complete ass. And his name was Corin Addison.
I was going to say, Corin's dad lives about 20 kilometers down the road from me now. Graham.
I was going to say, you would probably know this guy.
I know his dad very well.
So I met Corin, and Corin was kind of, flying by the seat of his pants there a little bit. And I said, hey, do you want to go on a kayak trip after the team trials? And I've got some filming lined up, and I'd love for you to be a part of my film project. And we want to go run the shit. I want to get into the NAR. Let's go surf it up and run some NAR. I got these rivers lined up in Idaho between Oregon and Montana. There's just a road next to beautiful rivers the whole way, and we're just going to film the whole way up. And we did, and we made a movie called Paddle Frenzy, which came out before Paddle Quest. Mm-hmm. You might know it. There's that was back when Corin had the big mohawk, and
yeah.
We were traveling together, and I was, we were going out at night, and I was, helping him get his mohawk all set up and ironing it out on the back of the tailgate of the truck. And we were doing some pretty fun stuff back then, but kayaking was really our passion, and we were really, getting after it. And we had a lot of fun, and he was the one who really helped me go from, just really getting into the moves and training, and like saying, today we're going to practice this all day until we get it right. And, and he just helped coach me a lot. And I owe a lot to that guy too. He's been a huge influence in my life and my paddling career. And definitely big shout out to Corin. And I still speak to him often and paddled with him. I think it was 2 years ago. We paddled together, and that was a lot of fun. So I look forward to getting on the water with him a little bit more. But yeah, anyone out in the audience, if you have or can get a copy of Paddle Frenzy, there's some pretty classic scenes from that. Probably the most memorable that I get reminded of and hit up about a lot is the shots of us running Coyote Falls at really high water on the Clearwater River. And yeah, we were running everything in the same kayak. We had the Hurricane, like the Prion Hurricane, like that boat was the shit for its time. Like we could stern squirt it, we could cartwheel it, we could run the hard class 5 in it with a slicey stern. It was super easy to boof, going super slow. It had enough speed, to go fast enough. We could back surf it. Back then, back surfing was like the big thing in the West, and more like cartwheels and retendos and stuff like that was kind of the big thing in the East, So this boat did it all. And that was the boat that we both paddled in the 93 World Championships on the Ocoee as well.
Those boats are indestructible. I was in a helicopter crash in New Zealand where there was swing loading kayaks beneath the helicopter, and we got a big gust of wind as we went over a mountain pass, and the what do you call it? The net went up into the tail rotor of the helicopter, and we were only about 100 meters off the deck, so we spun around in circles and hit hard, but everybody walked away. And
oh my God.
The only kayak to survive, every other kayak looks like somebody's taken a hot knife through butter and sliced it up. And there was a Prion Hurricane, I will never forget it, that looked like, well, today's Tuesday, I'm fine. It's like bulletproof, this thing.
Well, that was the boat that probably took the tail rudder out. Everything else just got blended up.
How to destroy a helicopter, take a Prion kayak to it.
Yeah. Prion, stronger than a helicopter.
That's it.
So, he introduced me to the Prion and got me paddling. I was paddling Perception at the time. I came out of a Corsica S, which incidentally he designed the first Corsica.
Yep.
When he was working with Perception, and then he got me into the Hurricane, and we convinced them to make us some ultralight Hurricanes for the Worlds, and him and I outfitted them with like hard foam for walls, and just like a little stick in the front for a foot brace. We took everything out, and my competition Hurricane was 15 pounds. I think his was 14 or 15 pounds as well.
Wow.
So we had some of the lightest Prion Hurricanes ever built, and they were a huge advantage for training and for paddling at Hellhole. Because our bodies were taking abuse. We were just out there 8 hours a day, paddling our hearts out, cartwheeling, flush. Like we'd probably do 200 rolls in a day,
Yeah.
and Corn and I went there, and we trained for 3 months straight before the Worlds at the Ecoe. And it really paid off. Yeah, I actually did quite well in the whole ride competition or the whole ride portion of that competition. So
that's, I remember I learned to kayak. So I was brought up near Hurley Weir in the UK, which you probably know of. And Sean Baker was the guy I used to see on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And I learned to cartwheel a Piranha Blade, which you probably remember as a very long boat.
Absolutely.
And that's a lot of boat to throw around. Especially when I look at my play boats. My freestyle boats are just off to one side by my swimming pool here, and now they're like 1.95 meters. They weigh next to nothing. And those that back then, those boats, that was a big workout to throw those boats about.
It was, and Corin was the first guy that I really saw completing like perfectly executed cartwheels in a kayak at Hellhole. And I emulated him as much as I could and started catching on. And so him and I were like starting to do some more technical maneuvers that some of the old guard there were starting to lift their eyebrow and be like, they might be onto something here. Because most of the time it was like the endo, land back in the hole, do a spin, maybe do an ender and a pirouette out of the hole, catching the top wave and being able to surf it, do an ender, pirouette, then land in Hellhole. That was a huge maneuver. And then all the paddle tricks and just the theatrics of it were a little bit of a part of it. Not a lot, but at that point, people were really starting to, give more credit to the technical paddling aspects rather than the theatrical aspects as much. And we started seeing some boats show up that were radically different than what those same athletes have been paddling before. And even some of the athletes going and buying Hurricanes and coming out and going, I need to have the right tool to do the job, to do as good as I possibly can to represent USA or Canada or whoever. Because there were some other, teams starting to show up and train. And it was very interesting because that was when we saw, the first kayaks that were quite a bit shorter and really with that squash down stern.
Yep.
The first Super Sport. Remember the Perception?
I remember the Super Sport. Yeah, Perception Super Sport. Yeah, with the squished back.
That was born because of the Hurricane. Bob McDonough saw the killing it in the Hurricane. He's like, we got to have something to compete with Corin and Dan and a couple other guys that are like getting the cartwheels after a few days, like that's going to be the move to beat. So that came about. And ironically, the Dagger RPM also started to show up there. And so that was really an interesting evolution of the equipment, which was a direct result of the maneuvers we were performing and trying to perform. And, other athletes who were bound by their sponsorship contracts or whatever needed to go back to those companies, which were located in the Southeast. So they were lucky enough to be able to drive 4 or 5 hours, go shape something, get a cast mold or whatever, and pop some stuff out. Yep. And so it was quite interesting, because just days before the 93 World started, we saw the very first, kind of production prototypes of the RPM, and I believe the Perception Super Sport. And EJ Eric Jackson went on to win that world in the Dagger boat that year. And him and I actually paddled head to head for first place in the last bracket in the whole ride portion of the competition.
That's and that's also that in terms of kayaking, that's the time where the idea of having more than one kayak, like having a boat to do freestyle and a boat to go run rivers, and that was revolutionary for kayaks, because up until then you'd had a boat, a kayak, and you did 100% of everything in it and did the best you could. It's a massive tipping point in the sport.
Absolutely. And the only reason we weren't creaking in the hurricanes that we had was because we knew they were so thin. They were not going to hold up if you came out of your kayak or got wrapped on a rock or something. They were not going to be strong enough just by design, because we were trying to get something really lightweight. And I believe we had a little bit of a performance advantage with the weight of our boats back then. But yeah, other than that, we just had like a regular hurricane. We did everything in that, like, hey, we're going to do the Green Narrows. Okay, cool. Hurricane it is. Like, that's my creek boat. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun back then. And I went back to Montana after going to the World and said, talking to my partner, hey, I'm going to go follow this kayaking career. I want to get out of the retail grind here in Missoula, and I need to go do my globe-trotting paddle lifestyle. And that's when I kind of checked out of Port of Missoula and Montana, and just really started living the van life back then. I went and bought a 1973, I think it was about 35 foot long, big Class A motorhome for like $4,000, and painted it red, white, and blue, and just started driving it from river to river to river to river. I got Teva to sponsor me and put their logo, on the side of the motorhome big. And that was it. You might see that motorhome in some of the old videos, like Dashboard Burrito. I started paddling with like Eric Jackson. EJ was the one who said, hey, okay, so fast forward 3 or 4 years. EJ's like, dude, we got to get you out of the Eskimo and the Prion and into the wave sport. Like, it's the next thing. Like, we've got this new boat. It's the Kinetic. It's like amazing. Like, I know you're going to love it. Like, you've got to try it. He called me up, and I think I was still living in Montana at the time. So I booked a flight. I flew back. Corin had also started Savage.
Yep.
So he was hitting me up to try the Scorpion. So I flew back and I went and I tried the Scorpion with Corin. And then I went up to Bethesda, Maryland, met up with EJ, jumped into Kinetic, and man, that boat, I just gelled with that boat. I loved it. And EJ was like, yeah, we'll just like plug you right into the team, free boats, you know, competitions paid for. You can do a little traveling and filming and whatever you're doing, and you can represent wave sport. And this crazy guy Chan runs it, and he's awesome, but he's kind of super crazy too. And I think you're really going to dig it. And that's when the whole wave sport era started. So, you know, I'm really bad with dates and years. So my life is basically recounted by which boat I was paddling and what era I was in. So that's basically how I look back at my life, is like, oh yeah, those are the wave sport days. Those are the pre-on days, or those are the perception days. You know, it's funny. But this must have been around 99, 2000, and joined wave sport. And then it was amazing. You know, we just started working on stuff. Dan Brabeck was an amazing paddler and designer. And he took, I can't remember the name. Oh, it was one of their creek boats, or maybe it was just straight up the Z or something like that. Or no, it was the laser. He took a laser, basically cut off both ends, and like just crudely stapled and welded and stuck it all back together. And it was like 7 feet long, something like that. And then he called it, we were like, that is the ugliest kayak I've ever seen, Dan. What is it called? He's like, this is the stubby. I think we're going to call it the stubby.
I remember the stubby.
And that was the prototype to the stubby. And then all of a sudden we started paddling this boat that was like 2 feet shorter than anything else out there. And it was amazing. We could creek in it. We could do everything in it. And it was our play boat and our creek boat. And it was just really a revolutionary boat. And Dan Brabeck really had a lot to do with that. And then he was, you know, bouncing ideas off EJ. And then they were taking their ideas back to Chan, and Chan was building molds. And then it just progressed from there, you know, and then we went into the whole alphabet era, you know, with the X and the Y and the Z and all that stuff. And the triple X, which was like one of my favorite kayaks ever.
It fits in that.
And that was when I was really involved with wave sport. And at that time, Chan was really into building the high performance boats, having the best team with all the best athletes that he could. So we had like Erica Mitchell, Jamie Simon, Brooke Winger, Andy Bedingfield. You know, we had Billy Craig. That's awesome. Just to name a few. And we were all, you know, killing it at all the whitewater rodeos and a lot of the races as well. So a lot of the events would have like the freestyle part and then the racing part. But it wasn't like there were really anybody that specialized. It was like, okay, we know we got a chance. We could probably beat EJ in the freestyle part, but he's definitely going to kick our asses in the race part, you know, because he had come from all the slalom stuff, you know, in the US slalom team and training, and he was so fast, you know. So it was really fun going to the competitions back then because I really liked the racing and the freestyle bit. And Chan really stepped up and gave us awesome boats for both. And then we started coming to the Gorge and doing the Gorge Games, which was one of the first events with a big cash prize, you know, $5,000 for first. They had like a $20,000 cash purse for men and women. So basically anyone who wanted to be a kayaker or try to win a little bit of money was coming to the Gorge in July for the Gorge Games. And then that's when we started to see like Steve Fisher and, you know, people coming from other parts of the world to come and race. It wasn't freestyle. This was like extreme racing.
Yep.
And that's really when I started to fall in love with the Gorge, you know, and that was the first time I got to do the little white salmon and, you know, doing 50, 60 laps in in 30 days on the green truss of the white salmon, like paddling it 2 or 3 times a day sometimes, and just getting the lines dialed. And back then we were paddling the laser because it was the fastest thing that we had, and
it's interesting.
That was
Not
my
a lot's changed in that time period of what must be 20-ish years. You still got Benny and Rush, and Dane is in the gorge at the moment. And those guys are still doing, three laps of the truss in a day, or 2 laps of the little white. It still is the home run, as it were.
Absolutely. The people have changed, but the river hasn't, and it's still like, if you can imagine like a perfect class 5 river, beautiful water, crystal clear, great access. I mean, it's the white salmon. I mean, it's the little white salmon. They're beautiful. The only other rivers I've personally been on that even come close to the quality whitewater and the beauty in those areas is maybe a few places in Europe and in Chile. And I mean, I'm sure there's lots of places that have that, but it's really, I believe, that area on the Washington side of the gorge is really a very unique area for that whitewater that runs through it. And the amount of days that you can do it is just unbelievable. The white salmon you can do every day.
I was going to say it's unique because like throughout most of Europe, you get 3 to 6 months of a river with glacial melt or snow melt that you can just go paddle. But after that, it dries up. Normally September time dries up. The little whites, I think I've only paddled it 10 or 15 times maybe, but it's never been in the same month. Like I've paddled it in September, December, February, March. It just goes all year round. Sometimes bigger and sometimes smaller, but there's not very many places in the world where you can have such a cool river that you can paddle virtually 365 days of the year. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And, nowadays I've been mostly on a stand-up paddleboard, and I really fell in love with the feeling of standing and paddling, because I felt like it was like this perfect medium between kayaking and snowboarding. It was like snowboarding down the river in slow motion. It's unbelievable. The first time I got on a paddleboard in 2007, I was working with AT Paddles. So I had been with them since they had started, working on one of their very first bent shaft whitewater designs, which Corin and I collaborated on, the ATX, and then some of the other designs that came out after that. May they rest in peace, Adventure Technology. Yep. One of the owners had just come back from Hawaii, and he had just been over there learning how to build his own dugout canoe, literally dugout canoe from a tree.
Wow.
So he was there doing that. But when he was there, he saw some guy out paddling. It happened to be Laird, I'm sure, out surfing big waves on a huge surfboard with a paddle in his hand, like a big, long canoe paddle. And he came back and he was like, dude, I saw the sport I think you're going to like. It's called paddleboarding, stand-up paddleboarding. I'm like, what is it? And he explained it to me. I was like, yeah, I want to do it. Let's try it. How do we do it? Where do we get a board? Like, what do we do? He's like, well, obviously I've already got the paddle. So he had been designing outrigger paddles. So we just basically took a long shaft and put it on the outrigger paddle.
Yep. Problem
solved. And he had a line on a tandem called a Mickey Munoz paddle, which basically it was a tandem surfboard that Surf Tech made at the time. The top was covered with foam and it was just really long. It was like 11 feet long, and it was a lot wider than a normal surfboard, which might be like 22 or 23 inches wide. This board was 26 or 27 inches wide, which is still quite narrow for a stand-up paddleboard. And we ordered a couple, And a couple of weeks later, we got them. And I remember it was March, it was cold, and I went out and started paddling, and it was a bit awkward at first, but then after like 15 minutes, I was like just flat water, just on the Columbia Gorge. I was like, wow, this feels good. This is nice standing up. My back doesn't hurt. I'm not sitting in water.
No
It's
pins
not
and needles in your
awkward.
feet.
Yeah, it's not awkward getting in or out of the water. Like I can just stand onto the board and just go. I don't need to put on a bunch of crazy gear. I'm not getting water up my nose. I don't want to get my head wet today. I just want to get some exercise, be on the water. And I came back loving it. And I was out there paddling around my first time, and I was like, gosh, I wonder if I could ever take something like this down the river. Like, how cool would it be to feel the chark and to feel the G forces and the inertia, just doing an eddy turn, just doing an eddy turn, standing up, planting your paddle. I could just visualize it, just planting my paddle and just turning right around my paddle, right into an eddy on the river, on a paddleboard. Like, that would be sick. And about a week later, I tried it. And about 5 minutes after that, I had ripped the fins out of my board. I had completely destroyed, my paddleboard. And so right away, I was like, okay, this is a thing that I'm going to do. Like, as awkward as it is, I think it's going to be awesome. But the technology definitely has a ways to go, because, surfboards do not belong in the river, especially for river running with the fins sticking down and the composite materials. And I had already had plenty of experience with slalom boats. I'd only had 4 or 5 by at that point, but, I didn't want to be repairing my stuff as much as I was paddling.
Or more.
And I was working with Warner Paddles, and they had kind of tasked me to grow their stand-up paddle design. So I helped with that. And then I started, meeting some people from the industry that worked with different companies and looking at the different technology that it would take to get a board to go down the river. And I was really into it. So I was going to races. I started ocean racing. I got really into the fitness aspect of it. I went to the first biggest stand-up paddleboard race in the world called Battle of the Paddle. And did that. And this was all just ocean racing, so on longer boards, it was, paddle till you throw up and then keep paddling some more until your heart explodes, and then run up and down the beach a bunch. It was bananas, but for some reason I liked it. I really liked the physical aspect of it and the competition aspect and the paddling aspect, I guess. So that gave me a good glimpse into what some of the other companies were doing with the technology. And it was then that I was introduced to seeing my first inflatable stand-up paddleboard. And I was like, that's it. Like, that is the tool that I need to go down the river safely and has some durability. It's going to bounce off the rocks, not going to have to repair it all the time. If rip the fins out and whatever, put new ones in, glue new ones on, paddle without fins. Who cares? Like, kayaks don't have fins. Why do I need fins on a paddleboard? So I got with a company back then called Uli, who was making some inflatable paddleboards, and they sent me some to test, and I helped them with some designs with some additional rocker and different design shapes. And he really was a small company and just building boards one by one in his garage. And at the same time, I was starting to do better at the racing part of it. And I had a bigger corporate company come to me and say, hey, we'd love for you to paddle our boards on a racing level and represent us in all these competitions. Because we see you're going to all the competitions and you take great pictures and you're doing videos, and we really like what you're doing on Facebook and all this other stuff. And that was called Starboard. And Starboard had come from the windsurf industry.
Yeah.
And a guy named Sven Rasmussen was like, yeah, we want you to paddle our boards. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. They had like the most awesome race boards ever, like their whole lineup was just like, oh my God, they make like 30 different types of windsurf boards alone. big international company. And I said, yeah, I'd love to, but there's only one condition. And Sven asked me what it was. And I said, to build me a board that's indestructible for the river, and to work with me on designing and producing the first and ultimate whitewater river board. And that's something that they were able to do and agreed to do. And we worked on that, and we came out with the stream about a year later, and really kind of set the precedence, at least for design and specifications wise, as becoming the medium for all the whitewater boards now. They're all 9.6 long, 9.5 feet long, 36 inches wide, 4.5 to 6 inches thick. That is like the standard whitewater river board with lots of rocker, and that's something I'm really proud of, is really taking a look at what worked in kayaking, what worked for river running, and applying that straight to stand-up paddling. What's going to work? Like, what is I don't know. I'm just going to use like the Nomad, the Nomad's a great kind of beginner kayak.
Yep.
A great kayak that's just like that perfect size that kind of anyone can get into it, and have fun, learn to roll, paddle class 1, 2, 3, and figure out where they're going to go with their kayaking. I wanted that for stand-up whitewater. And that's where we came up with when I came up with the 9.6 by 36 in the inflatable, move the fins forward, do something with some smaller fins that were flexible. So when you hit them, they wouldn't break. They would just kind of take the hit or bend a little bit or whatever, or even make them replaceable. So if you did break them, you could put new ones in. And and that was just amazing, the Starboard Stream, and they did amazing. We sold tons of them. All of a sudden, Colorado started picking up. There were just like a few people here, a few people there getting into stand-up paddling on whitewater. Corin was one of the pioneers. A guy named Charlie MacArthur in Colorado really pioneered it in his area. And that was about the same time that Facebook started getting bigger. And so it was really fun because we could share these experiences on Facebook, and then these designs. And then quickly we saw a lot of other companies start to adopt the same types of designs. And it was almost simultaneously that C4 was working on a whitewater board as well with Charlie. And they came out with their whitewater model, which is very similar specs that I picked. But his was in composite, so it was a little bit faster, and some people really enjoy that feeling, but it was still composite. So like if you hit a rock or anything, you were going to be
toast
doing repairs.
How do you go about managing all of that safety stuff when you're stood up on a board whistling down class 3? Because as opposed to being a few feet off the water level, you're now, well, your head's, for me, my head would be over 6 foot off the water level. There's also things like, I don't know, I've never whitewater SUP'd, I'll be honest, so I don't know. Yeah. But I have this envisage of me breaking my coccyx bone or something like that, landing on a rock. I mean, what sort of things did you add onto what you did in kayaking to ensure that you stayed safe?
Well, the first and most obvious thing to figure out was the leash. We don't tie ourselves to a kayak because we know that would be a really quick trip to the morgue. Yeah. So that didn't make sense to wear an ankle leash on a kayak, on a stand-up paddleboard, because you're just, writing your own death sentence. So the first thing I did was take the leash off. So like, fine, just don't use a leash. That's fine. But then I'd be paddling down and I'd hit a rock or something, and I'd fall, or I'd hit a wave and I'd fall, and my paddleboard would go over here and catch an eddy, and I'd swim over here to the other side of the river. And now I'm like, okay, now I got to jump in the river, swim across, get to my paddleboard. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So a leash still made sense. so that I wouldn't lose my craft, the most important thing that I need to navigate and be safe is actually the paddleboard itself. But it can't be around my ankle. If it gets caught on anything, then I'm going to be strung out by my ankle, which obviously if I'm underwater, I can't reach my ankle. So I basically took a little piece of bungee cord that I knew would break, and I just tied it to my life jacket, and I just slipped the regular ankle leash Velcro part through that loop and just did it up that way. And I still do the same thing to this day after trying a million different other systems, including safety leashes and, all kinds of stuff. Like, there's been a lot of different innovation attempts at a good whitewater leash for stand-up paddling. But still to this day, I use the same thing that I started with, which is a small piece of bungee, which will break under the weight of my body, even less than that. And I just attach that to the board and to my life jacket. And then I attach the leash to that. So it can either break free from my board or it can break free from my life jacket. And I don't have to pull anything, because if I fall and break my arm, it's not like I can pull a safety release. If I'm unconscious floating down the river with my board attached to me, I'm not pulling anything.
Correct.
I'm just floating down the river. So if my board gets caught on something, at least it's going to break away. So there's been actually quite a few fatalities because of leashes on whitewater, and some with people intentionally going to run whitewater, some by complete innocent bystanders that didn't even know that we're just paddling in an area where there was a lot of current, and they happened to paddle over a submerged piece of rebar or a stick that caught their leash, and there was enough current to hold them under.
Yep.
I mean, it happens every year. We hear about tragic accidents every year because people don't even know that that's even a possibility. And I mean, there's hundreds of posts on all kinds of forums that are long and deep on what is the best, way to leash your board of whitewater. And, I'm under the firm belief that it needs to release from both ends of the leash, and you don't need to pull anything. It just breaks under the force of the water. So that's kind of what I subscribe to. It's worked for me. Luckily, I haven't been in that situation very often. As far as the other part of it that you mentioned about breaking your face, your hand, your arm, your leg, or your ass, that can happen. I've seen all of it happen. Probably the most frequent injury, and where people underestimate the river, is with lower leg injuries from your knee, basically from your waist down to your feet. So the very first thing you need to have is an awesome pair of footwear, high top shoes, whether you want to go to the cheap route and get some look-alike Chuck Taylors on Amazon for $5, go for it. Or you want to go for the ultimate, which would be something like an Astral, like the high top Astral shoe. I call them the Nar Jordans. Those are awesome.
I'm a big fan of the 510 Canyoneers, and the 510 Water Tennies are two other great shoes for that sort of thing.
Exactly. Something high top I like, protects your ankles and your feet. Obviously, if you fall off a paddleboard, it's shallow. You can land flat, yeah, but your feet are going to hit the bottom. Like, your legs are going to hit the bottom. When you're kicking to swim back to your board, you're going to hit your knee or your shin or your ankle on a rock. Like, it's just going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's, just going to happen. So I started wearing my mountain bike pads, the shin knee pads. And those really helped a lot because, I was hitting my shins and my knees like the very first time I went, and I was like, okay, the next time I'm wearing knee shin guards, like I have them at home. So I just started wearing my mountain bike kit, and it worked great. And I mean, I've read many a story too where people have broken their knees on the rock. You fall off your mountain bike, you hit the ground. When you fall on the trail, yeah, it hurts, but at least you bounce back a little bit. When you're in the water and the water is surrounding your leg and you hit a rock, there's no bounce. There is no bounce. So it is a different thing hitting your knee, even just a little bit on a rock in the water, something's going to break, it's going to be your body. Like, it's just not the same as hitting your knee on a rock on your mountain bike when, your leg can kind of bounce back from that. In the water, that just doesn't happen. And that's why it feels like whenever you hit a stone or a rock, when you're in a river, it feels like somebody just like a 300-pound man just smashed your leg into a hammer or something. It's just the hits are so much harder. So I really, suggest strongly a good pair of knee shin pads. If you have a lot of whitewater kayak experience and you can read the water well, you're fine with just a regular helmet, regular life jacket, maybe some elbow pads. If you have no whitewater experience, and you don't know how to read the water well, then you probably want a full face.
Yep.
Just in case. If you know how to read water, you probably know that you're heading into a section where you might fall and Superman, and you're going to avoid that section, or at least you're going to be prepared for it. If you have very little to no whitewater reading experience, those are the types of individuals I see that tend to go Supermaning into the rocks face first a lot more. So someone like you that has all that experience reading water, you're going to know already where to go and where not to go, and to generally find the deepest spots of the river. But there's a lot of people getting into whitewater SUP that have no whitewater kayak experience because they don't want to kayak. They never wanted to kayak. Kayaking didn't look fun to them because all they could imagine themselves being is upside down, smashing their face into rocks.
And now they've got into the rocks.
Well, now they've got SUP, which A, they don't have to learn how to roll. B, when they fall off, they just crawl back on, and it's not a bunch of friends, chasing their shit down the river. Just the level of entry is so much more appealing. I find that especially with women that really got into whitewater SUP as opposed to whitewater kayaking, because they don't want to be upside down in a kayak. They don't even want to get in a kayak because they feel claustrophobic in a kayak, but they want to be on the river. They want to enjoy all the other aspects of paddling whitewater and going on trips and camping and all the fun stuff. They just the kayak part was the turn off. And so it was really neat to see all these new people coming into the whitewater kind of space because of stand-up that weren't just bored kayakers, retired professional kayakers what we normally would see.
It strikes me in kayaking, there is a huge amount of coaching that happens in kayaking, not always paid for and not always by qualified people. It could just be the experienced guy in your paddling club who says, have a go at doing it like this. It's not necessarily ACA or British canoeing or anything like that. But because stand-up whitewater is so new, we don't have that old guard really of people to be those informal mentors and informal coaches and whatever else to pass yet. I mean, we will get there, to pass on that experience of how to read the water, what's good to go, what's not good to go, how to avoid certain problems, so on and so forth. And I guess that's going to lead to a period of some challenges and accidents that could be avoidable. But if you don't have the experienced people around in vast numbers, it's going to be, a free for all until we do get those experience, the survivors.
Yeah. And it's been interesting because I tend to be the safety buffalo, and show up with a little bit, probably more protection than the average person would. And a lot of times I'd show up to the same put-ins I'd been going to for years in my kayak, like the middle white salmon or the lower white salmon, which is generally for beginner to intermediate kayakers that are learning. And then I show up and they're like, whoa, who's the dude dressed like a football player on the paddleboard, And that was me. And it didn't matter what I looked like. And like I always said, whitewater paddling is no fashion show. Like there is nothing sexy about whitewater kit. I don't care if you're in a kayak, a raft, or a paddleboard, or a ducky, or whatever. So it's about surviving the day to do it again tomorrow because you had so much fun. You want to do it every day. So that was my whole thing. So
I often say in a dry suit, you look like you're wearing a used tea bag often. Like no matter how good the dry suit manufacturer is, it's still not a aesthetically beautiful, perfectly cut thing. And it probably can't be because of the ergonomics of how you need to move around and you need that space and movement.
But
it does look a bit like you're wearing a used tea bag. That's what I always think of.
Yeah. And so it brought all these different challenges to stand up whitewater because a regular dry suit for stand up whitewater sucks. Mm-hmm. Like you're swimming so much, like trying to actually swim, like go jump in a lake with your dry suit and try to swim 100 meters and see how fun that is. Like, it's like trying to swim with a suit on. Like it's just so baggy. Like you don't get anywhere. And then go jump in the lake with a nice wetsuit and do the same thing. And you're like, oh my God, like I could haul ass in this thing. Like, this is awesome. So there's always like wetsuit or dry suit, wetsuit or dry suit. Like that's like the most common kind of question I get a lot, Certainly a dry suit is great. If you're experienced, you want to do this a lot and you're willing to spend some extra money. Sure, dry suit is a great option. That's what I personally enjoy 80% of the time. But the other 20% of the time, or if you're not quite sure if stand-up is your thing and you don't want to throw your whole bank account at it, wetsuit is the way to go. It provides a ton of extra flotation, protection for your body. And at first, you're falling off a lot more. So you need to be agile and you need to take a proactive swimming kind of attitude to get back to your board quickly because you're safe on your board, that you need something that you can move around in. So a lot of times, I see people getting into it. They go throw $1,000 at a nice dry suit and it takes them, an extra 15, 20 seconds to get to their paddleboard. And by then they're just getting banged up in the next rapid. You don't get to your paddleboard within 10 seconds, you're going into the next rapid. Well, that's like a whole nother rapid you have to swim.
It's a whole lot more bruises.
Yeah. If you're wearing a $200 wetsuit, boom, you're back on your paddleboard. Even if it's upside down and backwards, you're on top of it and you're protected.
It's interesting because one of the things that I get asked, people often are looking for definitive, the right answer to questions like, so Dan, dry suit or wetsuit? And I think what I'm getting from you is you give a similar answer to me, which is it depends. And
absolutely,
nobody really likes that answer because they want the definitive right answer. But you're like, well, based upon the conditions, your experience, how many people in the group, the type of river you're paddling on, so on and so forth, it just depends. And I don't think people like that because it asks them to think really heavily about what they're doing, who they are, how they are, and often have an honest reality check on their own skills and ability, which some people don't like because that's like ego, not damaging, but it's around that how they view themselves.
It's funny because right now in the world we live in, and with all the crap that goes on in the world with the way humans are, human nature, I firmly believe that the more ignorant people are, the less experience they have or are willing to obtain and or knowledge, the more they just want black and white answers. Are you this way? Are you that way? Is this better than that? Whereas as people get more educated, more experience, more exposed to whatever the issue is, whether it's wearing a dry suit or a wetsuit, whether it's climate change or whatever, that there's a million shades of gray. And it just depends on the situation, and everybody's different. Every situation is a little different. And you can't just say a dry suit works better than a wetsuit for stand-up paddling. Even for kayaking, I used to wear wetsuits for kayaking on places where I thought a big swim was really inevitable. I felt safer in a wetsuit. What if my dry suit rips? What if I'm getting banged down? I'm doing like Golden Gate section in California. It was one of the rivers I remember. I'm going to wear a wetsuit today because I feel like if I come out of my boat, I'm not just going to get beat to a bloody pulp or rip my wetsuit on a sharp rock.
Yep.
Same with like the North Fork of the Payette has a ton of sharp rocks. I would feel a lot safer paddling that in a wetsuit than a dry suit until I felt really confident.
Yep.
Last thing you want to be is on the North Fork of the Payette with a wetsuit with a hole in it. Like you're probably not going to survive that. People don't even survive swimming there anyways. So it just depends your skill level, your environment. And so there's all these variables now with a new sport, stand-up whitewater, that are just getting tossed at me all the time. And before it was like, there was no Facebook. There was no way to digitally communicate with somebody and ask them in 2 seconds what they thought about this or that. And so it put me and a bunch of other people that were kind of the pioneers of the sport in a interesting position, because we were constantly getting asked the same questions like that, constantly looking for guidance. And we were all self-taught. I mean, Charlie, myself, a lot of the guys that really pioneered stand-up paddling, and for the most part, some of the other sports that we're involved in a little bit. And people just want that knowledge because everyone has to start somewhere. And when you're learning, especially with a water sport, you've got to do it safely, because it's not like mountain biking. Mountain biking, you fall off, you get knocked out, you can lay there for 5 hours and you're still breathing air.
Yep. Face down in a puddle and you're stuffed.
In water sports, yeah, you got 5 minutes, so when it comes to wearing life jackets and helmets and just basic stuff, which for me was always like common sense. But then I started whitewater stand-up paddling and I go to the river and these guys are showing up with just a wetsuit. I'm like, bro, where's the rest of your kit? Like, what do you mean, dude? I just drove out from California. I'm like a experienced pro surfer. Like, I got this. I'm like, dude, you have no shoes on. Your feet are going to break off your body. And that's if we recover your, dead body anyways, because you're either going to be stuffed under a rock because you have A, no flotation, no life jacket, and B, you're going to be unconscious because you don't even have a helmet on. Like, if you go kayaking with me and you forget any one of those things, like your skirt, your life jacket, or your helmet, you are not paddling with me. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are. You'd be the world champ. But if you don't have a helmet on, you're not kayaking with me today. And it's the same with whitewater SUP. And people will look at me and just be like, dude, you're really an asshole about this. And I'm like, no, because I know what I'm doing and you obviously don't. Who's going to be rescuing who? Who's going to have to call whose wife or mom or whatever at the end of the day and say, hey, there's been an accident. Like, I'm not willing to do that. Sorry. Maybe for a Corin or my wife or someone like that, but they're not going to show up so ill-prepared anyways. They know I wouldn't tolerate that.
That's it.
So SUP brought this whole trippy dynamic because all of a sudden it brought all these surfers from the ocean to the rivers. And then with the advent of these, play waves, they're installing these waves, man-made features that are great for surfing, we had a lot of interactions there where there was a lot of discussion, if you will, around the merits of safety and respecting the river environment, and it was tough, because surfers are not known to be the most, welcoming tribe.
Yep.
And
That's very true.
when they brought those ideals, you can't bring those ideals to the river. It just didn't work. So there's been a lot of enlightening moments on the riverbanks with some of the surfers that really want to, hop in the river with no life jacket or helmet or whatever. And I understand that. In some places, you can totally get away with not having that. But it depends, again, it depends on where you are and sometimes who you're with.
That's it. I've got a close friend who lives actually not so far away from you. He lives in Sammamish, just outside Seattle. His name's John. And he always says in the outdoors, he's a paddler. He says in the outdoors, if you want to decrease safety, you say never or always. And if you want to increase safety, you say usually, maybe, and sometimes. Because there really is no always or never in the outdoors. There's a lot of usually, maybes, and sometimes. And I think for surfers, they come from quite a intimidating yet sterile environment in many respects. It's very, you sit in your car, you look at the break, you work out that whereabouts you want to go surf. Then you go paddle out and you surf, and the break's roughly as you saw it from your car windshield, right? That's roughly the same. And then when they get to the river, they just see water. So they're like, oh, well, it's be the same as a break, same as surfing, without realizing, of course, that river's going to change a million times in the next few hours. Go up, go down, features, bends, trees. There's a whole, and especially in the Pacific Northwest with the amount of wood you find in the rivers, that's a whole nother minefield of problems to deal with.
Yeah, you can only see, one teeny little fraction of what you're getting into from the put in.
That's it.
Between the put in and the takeout, it's like going to one surf break and then once you get in the water, experiencing 1,000 different surf breaks before coming back to your car again, like that you can't see. Yep. That you can't see. So
they just arrive. So listen, you've got into this curious thing called wing foiling recently. Tell us more about that, because I'll be honest, I've never seen it. So I saw until today, till I jumped on your YouTube channel.
Right.
Tell us about wing foiling.
Well, that's just the latest new sport that I've gotten caught up in, and I just love it. My life, I say, has been the endless pursuit of the magic carpet ride. So I believe we're getting closer and closer. I've always loved just riding trackless powder on a snowboard. Like nothing beats that feeling of not having to edge the board super hard and just feeling the resistance of the board underneath you and a little bit of pushback, but just so soft and flowing. And it's just an amazing feeling. And hydrofoiling on a board of any type standing up gives me that similar feeling. Like it's just amazing. The speed in which you could ride over the water with a hydrofoil, you're a couple feet above the water. So you're just magically floating above the water. And how it's so slippery when you're on a hydrofoil standing up. It is so slippery. It's like being on ice. It's just amazing how slippery that board feels under your feet. It's like you have to really fight to stay in front of it so that board just doesn't go flying out in front of you, which is the most common thing that happens to people when they get their first couple flights on a hydrofoil. Usually the board is just off without the person. They're off the back, or they're falling over. So it's just an amazing feeling. So I first started seeing hydrofoiling on the ocean. People were foiling in waves. And then some people started doing it on stand-up paddle boards. And I was like, okay, I am going to learn how to do that. So about 4 years ago, I started hydrofoiling on a stand-up paddle board. And it took me a lot of work. Like I learned in the gorge, just trying to do it in really high wind days on the big swell. We get a lot of swell. And it took me a solid 40 hours before I got my first controlled flight, like basically 50 meters of like riding on the foil without falling, being in control and going, okay, I have control of this now. I mean, 40 hours of just falling and paddling and struggling and falling and paddling and kicking the foil and putting a hole in my leg and then recovering from that and falling and falling. And so I was like, okay, probably stand-up paddleboard foiling is not going to be like a huge thing to catch on. Like it's got a really steep barrier to entry because getting up the amount of speed and power and the timing and everything with a paddle to make it happen, it's tricky. Like it's really, really effing hard. Like standing on a paddleboard is like riding a tricycle. Standing on a paddleboard with a foil and learning how to hydrofoil, that's like riding a unicycle. Like literally, that is like the difference. So, anyways, I learned, and then I was working with a company who had a designer by the name of Ken Winter, and I was in Hawaii, and Ken asked me if I wanted to try this new thing he had, which was like this thing called a foil wing. And I was like, sure, I'll try it and use the same hydrofoil board that I stand up paddle on, right? And he's like, absolutely. And it's basically like a windsurf sail that you hold just directly in your hand. So there's no connection between the board and the sail. There's no lines between a bar and the kite like you would with kiteboarding. So it takes all that away. And then it just gives you this freedom to move your feet on the board without having to have a mast or anything to trip on, or, you know, there's all these like really weird dynamics that happen between a sail and a board when you're sailboarding, which are great, but a lot of them are very limiting. And this sail is so light, you can just hold it in your hand and you can get going with enough power to actually lift the board out of the water and up onto the foil. And I was like, oh my God, this is so easy. Like compared to stand-up paddleboard foiling, this was so easy and fun. The first time I went, I was like foiling back and forth for like hours until like Ken and my wife are like, dude, we're leaving you if you don't come in. Like, we're going to dinner without you, because I was having so much fun. I did not want to stop. And that came out about 3 years ago, but over the last 2 years, it's really taken off in popularity. And gosh, it's just an amazing feeling. And now guys and girls are flipping and spinning, and they're racing and using it just as a motor to catch a wave. And then you can flag it out, which means you can just basically depower it and hold it in one hand. A lot of the wings only weigh a few pounds. So holding it in one hand with just a few fingers is like super easy. They're so lightweight. So you can just use the power of the wing to get yourself on the wave you want to surf. And then once you get on the wave you want to surf, then you just use the foil, the hydrofoil, to stay on the wave. And then you just hold the wing behind you. And you just surf. You just surf and you just foil surf as long as you can. And it's just amazing. You can go miles. Like here in the gorge, you can go 7 miles without ever having to use that power again to get on the.
I was just going to say, I've paddled a sea kayak down the gorge with the following wind and the swell and ridden the swell. And that was quite exhilarating, but I'm imagining that this is going to be 10 times that. This just sounds absolutely epic.
It's amazing, you know, and you're hitting speeds like 15 miles an hour,
Wow.
pretty easily. Some guys are going way, way, way faster than that. But going 15 miles an hour on a hydrofoil board where you're 2 feet above the water is like, it feels fast. It's an amazing feeling. And
Mm.
sometimes you can come up from behind a swell, come up over the swell in front of you, actually climb it with the wing. You can climb right over the swell and then drop back in the next swell in front of it. It's just like such an amazing feeling. So, yeah, I've really been into that lately. So I've been doing quite a bit of that. And yeah, just watching that sport grow is just bananas because it's really taken off. And it's pulling in people it's pulling in all the old windsurfers, a lot of kiteboarders, a lot of stand-up paddlers, surfers, foilers. It's really pulling from a lot of different channels within those water sports and getting a real diverse kind of mix of people. And it's neat. I've got friends in Montana that are doing it. My friend Cyril, who I used to stand up paddleboard race with here in the gorge a ton, he lives up in Montana. He's going up into Glacier, I think Glacier or St. Mary's Lake or something. They get tons of high wind there. They're doing it tons there. I've got a bunch of friends that live on the coast, on the East Coast, in the Northeast, in Florida and in California and in Oregon. They're doing it in the ocean. They just love it. And then we're doing it here in the gorge. God, it's just amazing. I mean, here it's just amazing because we have such good wind and swell. And it's just a natural because it's such a kiteboarding and windsurfing hotspot that it kind of lends itself to those sports as well because the accessibility, makes sense. But kiteboarding, you've always got your lines. So you've got to set up and you need a lot of real estate to kind of safely kiteboard. You can't really have people around you. They might get hit by the lines. Your kite can get caught in a tree or a bush and just your session's over. It's just a mess. Like the lines are just a huge issue with kiteboarding. With windsurfing, you've got the mast and just, you need so much wind really to get going super fast and to be windsurfing. Just, you need a lot of wind. There isn't that many places in the world where it's that windy that people want to live. It's just miserable if you live somewhere where it's blowing 40 knots all the time. Like, it sucks. Like, even Hood River people hate because, like, on garbage day, you'll see your neighbor's garbage can blowing down the street all the time because it's just windy. We had 75 mile an hour winds here 3 nights ago, which doesn't happen often, but like, people were afraid that trees are going to fall on their houses. Like, it's windy here. So, the windsurfing is great and stuff, but there's so many places where there's water where there just isn't a lot of wind. And when you combine it with the foil wing and the hydrofoil, it allows you to ride in just 10 knots. So it's really going to open up this new wind sport into places where you can't kiteboard because there's no beach. There's no access to set up a kite.
Yep. Small, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just not enough wind for windsurfing to be fun. So it's really opening up some unique places. And I think the sport's going to grow quite a bit in the future.
That's awesome. So throughout our conversation, Dan, you've eloquently taken us through different evolutions of kayaks, of stand-up paddling, of hydro. The thing that flicking through the back of my mind is, if you could look into a crystal ball, what do you think the future looks like? What do you think the next thing could be beyond the hydrofoil, maybe?
Wow, that is really something to think about. I look forward to seeing these cities similar to Bend, Oregon, similar to Boise, Reno, Nevada is a great example, where they've taken an area in their town, and instead of zoning it commercial and just building a whole bunch more $1 million high rises and selling condos for $1 million each to people that probably are just going to Airbnb them or live there 1 week a year anyways, they're building these beautiful whitewater based community outdoor spaces. That it's not just a whitewater park. It's like it's a park along a river, which is meant for the community, which is meant for the older folks to get out and take a walk and get some fresh air. It's meant for the younger kids to go and practice the latest and greatest cartwheel in their new Jackson kayak, or the middle-aged business guy who just got his new e-bike and wants to go ride it and not on the road. And just to see, these communities actually turning what might have been, like Reno's a perfect example, where the Reno Whitewater Park was, before it was a whitewater park, it was a place that was just downright a dangerous place to be. Like, it just was down by the river. There was a lot of trash. There was a lot of garbage. There was probably
drug use or whatever. Yeah.
A lot of nefarious shenanigans going on down there that weren't necessarily condoning a healthy lifestyle. A darker shade of gray, if you will. And they've taken those places and invested in them. And rather than trying to make $1 billion, they're just trying to make the community a healthier place and try to make it a prettier place, and something that actually gives people the desire to go out and want to be outside, period. I don't care if they're out there reading a book or out there learning how to foil board or whatever. I just think that's great. And I love seeing more of that. And I think that's huge, is just those communities having the wherewithal to invest in that, rather than just something that's going to make one or two people super duper rich, but it's actually going to make the whole community healthier and enhance their quality of life. I hope to see more of that in the future. As far as sports specific stuff, I definitely see more electric motors crossing with more outdoor sports, like how we've seen with the evolution of the e-bike.
Yep.
We're starting to see e-foil boards. Actually, you can stand on the foil board. The easiest way to learn how to foil board now is to go buy one of these. They're pretty expensive. I think they start at probably $5,000 or $6,000, unless you want to DIY one yourself. Is basically, it's got a hand wand and it's like a little surfboard, and you just pull the trigger and that thing has a propeller and it propels you up onto the hydrofoil and away you go.
Wow.
And so I just definitely see the melding of like the technology, the phone, the batteries, the brushless motors, and the outdoor sports, kind of coming together a little bit. And it'll be interesting to see where that is, because already with like e-mountain bikes and e-motorcycles, they've really blurred the lines there. Whereas like here, the mountain biking, it sucks. You shouldn't come, just so you know. Like, the mountain biking here is terrible. And the off-road motorsports opportunities here are also terrible, because there's like a million trails. But, before it was like, okay, motorcycles go here, mountain bikes go here. Now you have these electric powered bikes.
What are they really?
Yeah. What's the difference between an e-bike with a 3-inch wheel and an e-bike with a 2.5-inch wheel, and a 3-inch wide wheel looks a lot more like a motorcycle, than a mountain bike, except for they're both silent. And one can tear the shit out of a trail and ruin it in one day, and the other one won't. So, there's definitely going to be some challenges there with all that stuff. But I look forward to that stuff, and I think now with the whole pandemic, the pandemic has really kicked a lot of people in the butt to take a bigger picture look at their life, their lifestyle, and their work-life balance. And I think from this pandemic, we are going to see Well, we already have seen a huge surge in outdoor activities. And a certain amount of that will stick with people for the rest of their lives. I'd be like, you know what? I used to not do outdoor activities until the pandemic hit. It was the only thing I could do. So I went and bought a mountain bike, and now I love mountain biking, and that person will mountain bike for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
And maybe that's just 1 in 5 people, but that's like a million more people than were doing it 3 years ago or would have ever done it. And so I call that the stickiness factor, like who's going to stick with it, right? But from this boom in outdoor activities from the pandemic, I really see the whole outdoor industry getting a massive boost from the pandemic. Yes. And a certain portion of that, 10, 20, 30, maybe 50% will be sticky enough for people to stick with it for the rest of their lives. And so I really think COVID-19 in a weird roundabout way has just really enlightened a lot of people into how beneficial it is to being outside and their quality of life, period. And what really means a lot to them and what creates those memories and what you go to the grave with. Those are created a lot of times in the outdoor space. And hopefully that's sticky enough that, you know, it really helps, you know, people live better lives going forward. And I really think if I take a real big step back right now, that, yeah, it's a Pandora's box, the future, because there's so many more people that are stoked to be outside and do activities and to invest money and time and effort and their time into these activities that we're going to see a lot of innovation in the outdoor space in the next 10 years. I firmly believe that. And I don't know where it's going to go. You know, I don't know, you know, if it's going to be more people paragliding, more people kayaking or riding around on 2 wheels. For sure, water sports and cycling sports have just gone crazy. But these are 2 sports that I love, so I know. But I wouldn't be surprised if the hook and bullet, the fishing and hunting thing is going crazy, and you know, automobile racing and who knows what, all these kind of things that take people outside of their homes. I think it's all kind of blown up.
It has. I interview and speak with quite a lot of people. And the other week I interviewed a guy who owns a canoe manufacturing business in the UK. And he was fulfilling orders at the end of November, beginning of December last year, as though it was like early August. Right. And it's like the weather outside in the UK and Europe then, where it's like where you live. It's pretty grotty at the start of December, and yet the canoes are flying out the door. And then I spoke to an ultra marathon runner who lives in Seattle, and he has a coaching business where he coaches people to run crazy like 100-mile races and that sort of thing. And his books are full. Like he cannot coach or take any more people. And
that's amazing.
And that's at a really extreme. You think like running 100 miles cross country isn't like an entry level buy an SUP and have a go. Like it's a pretty big undertaking. And his books are full. He can't cope with anymore. And it's just boomed last year. So Tony Robbins, the what do you call him? Motivational coach, whatever you want to call him. Yeah. He always says, like, don't ask why something's happened to you, ask why it's happened for you. And maybe we should be asking that about the pandemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's, you know, everything is going to be different going forward. I mean, I just believe life now will be a little bit different going forward now that we've experienced this. You know, 3 years ago, I would have never imagined what the world has gone through in the last 13 months. You know, for someone to say, yeah, there's going to be a global pandemic, it's going to shut down everything, millions of people are going to die, you know, that was beyond my comprehension back then. And now that it's happened, I think that really it's been very enlightening for me, and I think for probably just about anybody, that it really is going to change people's lives going forward. So, for better or for worse, hopefully they got outside and went on a walk around the block and just took stock of how it made them feel, and how, you don't need to be rich to get outside and feel good.
Mm.
Um,
If it,
you don't need to be anywhere really special to get outside and feel good. And if your body feels good, your brain's probably going to feel good too. So, yeah, I see a lot of that. And so I hope that continues to be the trend, because I know for me, my life's most valuable lessons have all been learned outside on the river, in that space, through the people I've met while doing things that I love doing, whether it's riding up the chairlift with somebody that happened to say something that stuck with me for the rest of my life, whether it's somebody I kayaked with who helped me become a better kayaker than I ever would have become before, or I was mountain biking with and I fell and, was able to get me to a hospital, and I would have been totally screwed if I was alone. It's just life's lessons, I believe, come at you in a lot of different mediums. But for me, most of the really important ones and really valuable ones that have stuck with me have almost always been outside.
mm, that's it.
And
It's a very, very powerful medium, isn't it?
and if not, they've got a lot of parallels that you could make.
Yeah.
Just like go with the flow. Just go with the flow. Like with a river, you can't fight a river. You're never going to win. Like
Nope.
you paddle upstream all day long, and you're going to get tired eventually, but the river's never going to get tired, and you're eventually going to go downstream. So there's no point in fighting it. And it's like life, you know what I mean? At some point, you got to realize when it's time to just go with the flow. It's okay. Don't need to fight everything and disagree with everyone. And at sometime you'll actually learn a lot more if you just shut up and listen and just like go with the flow. And I think about that a lot, and going forward in my life, I think with the pandemic and everything, even more so is to just be quiet, listen, let other people speak, and nowadays there's just, with social media and the news and so many people trying to trick you into thinking what they think is right. And it's just, go with the flow a little bit, listen, take stock, but you don't always have to bark about it. You don't always have to go against it, and yeah, I look forward to the future. I think there's going to be a lot of great things. And hopefully, I mean, I'm 51 now. Hopefully I can keep recreating and keeping my body healthy enough to be outside and doing these things that I really love doing. I have been very lucky and very blessed, and very fortunate just to not have, gotten really hurt or killed or sick. And there are so many people that, haven't had that type of luck. And I just feel very fortunate that way. So we've seen a lot of people, especially in kayaking, get hurt or killed. And it's rough, and you gotta, figure out where your limits are and what and do the best you can with what you got and paddle with safe people. And, someone shows up to the put in with no life jacket. It's a tough thing to tell them that they're not paddling with you that day, but it's not for your benefit.
Yep.
It's not for my benefit to tell somebody they can't paddle with me because they don't have a life jacket on. It's their benefit. You know what I mean? They might not like that, but sometimes those are hard decisions and hard things to say, but yeah, it's amazing the life I've had. And I can't thank, my parents, the people who have supported me, my wife, all my sponsors I've had through the years and friends. I wouldn't be where I'm at today without that. So I really, I'm very grateful.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much, for your time today, but B, for being the shining light to show many of us the way through paddling different craft and adventuring, and also that you don't have to have a 9 to 5 cubicle job. You can have a passion that becomes a profession that puts a smile on your face and puts a smile on countless other people's faces at exactly the same time. So thank you so much for that. If people want to reach out to you and find you, contact you, where's the best place for them to find you?
You can go to my website, just dangavere.com. I also have a YouTube channel, and they can look it up by my name, Dan Gavere. Last name is spelled G-A-V as in Victor, E-R-E, Gavere. Also Instagram, I'm at danyak101.
I'll find you.
Which was a part of my very first email, danyak101@hotmail.
Whoa. Cool.
I had to make that one up in Chile when Chris Spelia said, hey, there's this thing called email. What's your email address? I was like, I don't have an email. He's like, make one up. And so I literally made that email up before I even established it. He's like, that's a weird one. I was like, well, it should be unique like my name, right? He's like, okay, whatever.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, folks, if you want to catch up with Dan, hang out with Dan, pick his brains, do anything, the links for all of what he just said is in the description below. And I'd encourage you all to go check him out, subscribe to his platforms, and follow his adventures, if nothing else. So Dan, thank you for your time, and please carry on being incredible so the rest of us can stay inspired by your adventures. Thank you so much, dude.
Thank you. I appreciate it.